Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. One of the joys of pastoral ministry is that I often find myself encountering people from various walks and occupations, and I get to learn new things from them. Something like that happened about 40 years ago when I was on my internship in western Nebraska. When I say this was rural country, you can believe it. One of the churches I served still had a hitching post outside in case folks decided to ride their horse into town. Once, when we had a snowstorm with several feet of snow, cars couldn't get through the snow on the roads, but horses could, and so that's what they did. One lady in the congregation was a local insurance agent, and as we were talking one day, she spoke about hail insurance. I had never heard of hail insurance, but she spoke about how farmers will take it out against the possible loss of their crops due to a hailstorm. I really didn't have much concept of that based on my knowledge of hailstorms here in South Carolina. I was used to hailstorms with hail about the size of a penny or a dime. Out there, it was a different matter altogether. Toward the end of our time out there, one farmer took me to see a field that had had hail damage. On both sides of where the storm came through, there were beautiful green 8-foot tall corn stalks. Where the storm had been, there was 2 to 3 inch stubble, and that was all. If you didn't have hail insurance, it would have been devastating. This week, in the wake of Hurricane Debbie dumping buckets of rain on our area, we are taking a look at storms in the Bible and their place in the Bible story. Today, we want to focus on 2 stories that are part of the Exodus narrative, as God worked through Moses to free God's people from slavery in Egypt. The first one describes a hailstorm that sounds devastating indeed, and I don't think they had anything like insurance back then. You know how the story begins. God sent Moses to tell the Pharaoh to let God's people go. Well, if you've got a bunch of free labor building whatever you want and doing whatever you want, you aren't likely to be inclined to just give that up, and neither was the Pharaoh. I suspect he took Moses and his request as a big joke. So that's when the plagues began as a demonstration of God's power. They come almost like warnings, 10 of them, getting worse and worse each time. Let my people go, God seems to be saying, or see what happens next. It even seems as the plagues go along that God gets fed up. The Bible says several times that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, as if to say, you didn't respond, and you've got it coming now. First, all the water turned to blood. Not just the water in the Nile River, but water in cisterns and buckets and wells too. Then there was an excess of frogs, and then lice, and then flies. Amazingly, these plagues afflicted only the Egyptians and not the Hebrew people. Then their livestock was afflicted, and then the people themselves got boils. The next plague was a hailstorm. As it says in Exodus 9, the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven, so that hail may fall on the whole land of Egypt, on humans and animals and all the plants of the field in the land of Egypt." Then Moses stretched out his staff toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire came down on the earth. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. There was hail with fire flashing continually in the midst of it, such heavy hail as had never fallen in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck down everything that was in the open field throughout all the land of Egypt, both human and animal. The hail also struck down all the plants of the field and shattered every tree in the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were, there was no hail. Even this did not convince the Pharaoh to let the people go. After this were plagues of locusts, darkness, and then the death of the firstborn sons. Finally, God's people were free. There's a second storm that's mentioned as part of the Exodus story. You know what happens after the people are freed, how they pass through the Red Sea and then travel to the mountain of God. What happens there is a storm like none we have ever seen. Here's how Exodus 19 describes it. On the morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and a blast of a trumpet so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak to God, and God would answer him in thunder. What an awesome sight that must have been. God's presence was near, and it was shown to them with such power that even the mountain itself trembled. I imagine that the people did too. In fact, I marveled at the next verses where God calls Moses to go up that mountain. Imagine how frightened he must have been to venture into the midst of that storm. Nevertheless, he did. And there he got the 10 Commandments, which even now guide our values and behavior. When people asked my father what he did for a living, he had a witty answer. He was a pastor, but rather than telling people that, he would say he was an assurance salesman. Not insurance, but assurance. Well, maybe those two storms demonstrate the difference. Pharaoh learned there is no insurance to protect against God. At the mountain, the people received the assurance that God was with them. God is with us too. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.